Welcome everyone to the lecture series hosted by the Spanish Fork Historic Preservation Commission. We want to thank each of you for being here tonight to learn a little bit more about our Spanish Fork Pioneer Cemetery. It's my privilege to introduce our guest speaker tonight, my good friend Richard Davis. Richard was born and raised in Spanish Fork. He is married to Tamara Thomas. They are the parents of 4 children, Rory, Haley, Kiplin, and Carissa. They have resided in Spanish Fork their entire lives, with the exception of 5 years when he attended Utah State University. He was a general and concrete contractor for 47 years. He served 2 terms on the Spanish Fork City Council. Join me in welcoming Richard Davis.
Thank you so very much. It's an honor to be here today. Let me just see if I can put my notes around here a little bit that I want to talk about. Can you hear me? Okay, very good. Well, first I want to make some thank yous. I want to thank Angela. Where'd she go? Oh, right there. For inviting me and letting me talk about the Pioneer Cemetery. And Councilman Kevin Euler, thank you for helping me today. He's going to make me look pretty good. So anyway, and Darla, thank you so much for letting me go into the Pioneer Museum and put up the ladders and crawl up it and take pictures and move things around and talk about history. That was a lot of fun, and thank you for letting me do that, because I've got a lot of nice pictures that I think we're going to show. It's pretty beautiful, isn't it? I just love this cemetery. I am not a historian by any means, but I am the son of a mother that loved her pioneer heritage. She loved it so very much. My mother, Fern Davis, was the president of the Daughters of Utah Pioneers. I'd have to take her up to Salt Lake when I was in high school, up to their place up there next to the state capitol, and drop her off, and then I'd walk around the Capitol buildings and do all sorts of things for 2 or 3 hours, and then take her home. And I did that many, many times when she served that term as the president of the Daughters of Utah Pioneer. Also, she was the president of our own Spanish Fork chapter. Her camp was Tocawana. Now, Tocawana's not around anymore, but that was her camp, Tocawana. She loved serving the city. She also loved going up and cleaning this Pioneer Cemetery. She did it for years and years and years before they finally fixed it up to the point that you didn't have to do it anymore. She loved her Pioneer Museum. She served in that for years and years and years until finally, at the age of 82, she had a stroke and couldn't do it anymore. I can still remember me and my little brother Bob moving that museum at least 3 different times that I can remember, moving it from one building to the next and taking those mannequins and moving them around a little bit. And I think the other day when I was over there taking pictures with Darla, I think one of them winked at me. We got very familiar. Okay, so if we're going to talk about the Pioneer Cemetery, we've got to talk about the pioneers, right, that came here. These wonderful people came from Scotland and Ireland and Wales and Denmark and all through the European countries. And they had a vision to come here to the United States, and so they sold their property and came across the ocean and came into Kirtland and the surrounding areas and built beautiful homes, and yet were kicked off of their beautiful homes. And then they moved to Nauvoo, and again had to move again when they built these wonderful, wonderful homes. Came across the plains and again came into Salt Lake City and started to build wonderful homes again. And then Brigham Young asked them to come down to Utah Valley and make a new home. I know of one story of a pioneer that sold his house for an oxen just to get down here. They were amazing people. I got this wonderful book. It's The History of Spanish Fork, and it's by Elisha Warner. And I just want to read just a little bit to you. This is some of the first pioneers. Now, we're not talking about Escalante, or we're not talking about John Freeman that came into the valleys. We're talking about the true pioneers that came here and settled Spanish Fork. It says that Enoch Reese, one of the earliest of the Utah merchants, was the first man to locate a home in Spanish Fork river bottoms. He took up 400 acres of land near where the Utah-Idaho sugar factory is now located. And on this claim, the first land was broken in the spring of 1851 by Charles Ferguson and George Seavey, employees of Mr. Reese. These two men came to Spanish Fork in the fall of 1850 and spent the winter here, taking care of about 200 head of Reese's cattle. During the winter of 1850, John Holt, John H. Redd, William Pace, and two other men by the name of Patrick and Glenn settled in the river bottoms about 1.5 miles above the present site of the city of Spanish Fork. In the spring of 1851, these early settlers broke land, and during the following summer was successfully raising crops. In the fall of the same year, John W. Berry, Albert Thurber, James Thomas, Morgan Hughes, William Holt, son of John Holt, Fernie Tidell, German and Benjamin Buchanan, John W. Moat, Charles Monroe, Buckrod Wilson, Stephen Markham, Lauren Roundy, and probably a few others located in the district, and with their families formed the nucleus of a settlement. These wonderful pioneers raised crops and herded cows and built roads and built bridges. They also built ditches and moved the water from the Spanish Fork River. Now, you all know what the Spanish Fork River is like in the spring. You know, when the winter storms come off of it and it is flooding like crazy. Back then there wasn't concrete, there was not dams. They had to do everything by hand. And they built ditches and moved water and used picks and shovels, and what they used was a slip scraper. It looks like a wheelbarrow. I wish I'd taken a picture of one. It looks like a wheelbarrow with the front end cut out. And they'd hook it onto the horses and move it along and scrape out the bottom of the ditch and flip it, had a spring on it, would flip up, the horse would push it out, bring it out and dump the dirt out, and then they would do it again. But before they did that, the pioneers would have to shovel and pick to loosen up the dirt and the rocks and stuff like that. Pretty hard work. Now, this wasn't their first rodeo. They had done it many, many times. Done it in Nauvoo, done it in Kirtland, done it in Salt Lake. I mean, these were pioneers, and they were smart and intelligent and knew what they were doing. They just had the wrong tools. They just didn't have backhoes and things like that. Anyway, but where did they live? You know, where did they live? In the summertime, they could live in tents and they could live in their wagons. But in the winter, it was a whole different ball game. They had to get out of the weather, you know, and so they dug into the hillsides. Next. I took these pictures the other day of the hillside just below the cemetery. And this is where they built their homes. In this book that I've got here, it states here, George A. Hicks writes, the dugouts were places dug in the ground, usually 4 or 5 feet deep, with steps leading down into the rooms from one end, and a roof usually made of willows and mud. The dugouts were quite warm and comfortable during the winter, there being a fireplace in the end opposite the entrance. They were generally without windows, so in order to get light, the doors must be left open, or the open fire depended upon the light. Some of the settlers were able to provide candles. Go ahead and move it again for me. This is a picture that was drawn by Delilah Williams, and this is what one of the huts would look like. do it again for me, if you would, please. This is another picture of somebody else's drawing of what it would look like. And now hit me one more time. Now this is an original picture. I don't know how that was taken, probably many, many years afterwards. But that's an original, what it was originally looked like, one of those dugouts. They called the people Gopher people. They called Spanish Fork at that time Gopher Town. They depended on each other to make a living. Now with families comes birth, right? And with families there comes death. In May of 1851, the first death happened in the city of Spanish Fork. 17-year-old Mary Catherine Redd, daughter of John and Elizabeth Redd. It states that she was buried on the bluff overlooking the river bottoms. In that first year, there were 7 deaths, and 4 of them were children. Trying to think where I can put this stuff. John Redd, one of the developers here in Spanish Fork, that was his daughter, Mary Catherine. 3 years later, he lost another son in November, and 3 days later lost his wife. And a year later lost another daughter. These were hard times. The last recorded death in this cemetery plot was recorded in 1928 that Joseph Gitz. You got to remember that there was no sextons at the time that they came here. There was no backhoes, no way but shovels and picks to dig graves. And they did it themselves, and they took care of their graves themselves. I'd like to read something that Janine Basgard talked about in her talk when they rededicated the Pioneer Cemetery back in 2009. Talks about a story of a family. She states, "You are now expecting your first child. Then suddenly one day, during a blizzard, your wife screams your name, and you know there isn't enough time to call for a midwife. As you desperately try to comfort your companion, you fear you are about to lose both your wife and your child. Then your tiny son slips into the world. You clear his mouth with your fingers and listen to the first cry break through the frigid air as you wrap him tightly in your own coat. Winds howl outside your dugout. You have only an old quilt between you, your family, and your safety between you. You speak of spring and summer times ahead. You silently pray that the whiteout will cease so you can go for help, but the snowstorm rages on. Then finally, in sheer exhaustion, you, your wife, and baby fall asleep. When the first streams of sunlight break into the dugout, the next morning you wake up and notice that the wind has stopped. You are relieved that the storm has passed. Then you glance over to look at your wife. She is still asleep, but you notice your newborn son has grown cold. You try desperately to blow warm air on his face, but your breath drifts like smoke into a frigid air. Your tiny newborn's face is blue, and then you know for sure what you think you cannot bear. Your child is dead. Later, when you leave your child's side, you go for help. A kind neighbor assists you with burial of your only child by keeping a fire burning all day and night so you can get his spade into the frozen earth. The bluff of the hill just above the dugout is your child's final resting place. As your newborn son is slowly lowered into the earth, you look out over the snow-covered river bottoms and raise your eyes to the majestic view of the rugged mountains to the east. Then you kneel in the frozen snow beside his grave, whisper your last goodbyes, and weep. Thank you. You know, there's other stories about a 17-year-old girl in May that was picking flowers one day, and the next day she was sick, and the next day she was gone from colic. Another story about a father that decided to finally be able to build a house and went up to the mouth of the canyon to get rocks to build a foundation, with. And while he was picking at the rocks, a top of the cliff fell off and fell down on him and crushed him. Many other pioneer stories of death. You know, they placed monuments over these graves, and they usually were made out of sandstone and deteriorated very fast. The winters, as you heard before, were very hard on the soil, and they froze 2 or 3 inches deep. And if anybody's ever worked with frost and have taken a pick and hit it into a frosted field, it bounces off like concrete. And so they would have to go take sagebrush and any type of building material that they could possibly find and put over this grave and burn it for 2 or 3 days just to get the frost out of the dirt so they could finally pick down and make this little grave. It was hard work. By 1871, the new Spanish Fork Cemetery was being built. It was closer to the cemetery, to the settlement, and the cemetery was sort of abandoned. And even some of the families and some of the friends exhumed their family members and moved them into the new Spanish Fork Cemetery. But over the years, because of not having water or anything like that, weeds started to grow in the cemetery and prairie grass and things like that. At one point, the markers were moved or destroyed, and parts were thrown in a heap at the brow of the hill, making it impossible to even know where these wonderful people were buried anymore. And it was farmed over and cattle grazed over the cemetery. In 1941, the Daughters of Utah Pioneer, under the direction of the J. Wiley Thomas Camp, decided to reclaim the cemetery. They did fundraisers and anything they could to make money. Now you got to remember, this was during World War II, or just the start of World War II. It took 2 years to do the project that they wanted to. They hired a person to design it and another person to build it. Next, if you could, please. This is the monument that was built. That is the mayor, John Booth, at the time, that's sitting there on top of those steps. They built this monument. They built the steps. They built railroad ties going up to the steps. Next, please. This is here on, they called it the river bottom road, but it's 1400 East. Next, please. This is about where it used to come up here. If you drive down going into the river bottoms, those steps just about where the concrete wall is and where the rock wall meets is where those railroad ties used to go up. Next, please. This is sort of a, if you can see, you can see a path going up to the cemetery. It goes through 2 building lots of today, 2 houses, and the bottom of that is 1400 East. And they built those steps, they gravelled it all the way up, and built a metal rail fence. Go back a couple. Yeah, right there. That's a good picture. Go back right there. Oh, well, we had it there. Right there. Anyway, you can keep it right there for a minute because that's what we're going to come to next. But you can see that they did build that railing fence. President Henry Gardner dedicated that monument at the time. I'd like to read a couple of letters. One is by Fred Markham, who designed it, and one was by David Robertson, who built it. Let me just read these. These were given at the dedicatory of the cemetery and that monument. It gives me great pleasure today to be here at the dedicatory exercise of this early pioneer monument. This is Fred Markham speaking. I hope you people will come up here often and enjoy reminiscing about the pioneers. I think it is beneficial to come to exercise such as these because it is tying us back to the pioneers. I feel that as the country grows and as the community grows, it is going to be more and more necessary that we retain connection with the old stock that settled this part of the community. As I pondered over the design of the monument, I considered the spot where it would be located. The beautiful mountains in the east, the lake in the west, the fertile fields in the bottoms below formed a picture to be enjoyed. I think it is necessary to be comfortable and able to rest, and so for that reason we have lowered places at each side of the monument. As you can see on each side, you can see places where they can sit. It is my hope that many of you will come out here frequently and relive the lives of our pioneer. Now, David Robertson, who built it, he got up and talked, and this is what he said. This is the first time I have seen Brother Fred since I took hold of his plans to build this monument, and I do not know whether it is satisfactory to him or not. When the plans were first handed to me, I looked them over and said, "Why, you can't build that. It would cost you over $500. $500. But you know, they ended up building it for $214. Sister Edna Brompbank says, "We're pretty good hands at raising money." So I said, okay, and we went to work. Like the committee that built the Salt Lake Temple, we said, we will get the best there is in the mountains. And we went behind the steel plant and got the purple granite rock, and went by the Palmyra Park in the quarry and got white calcite rock, because they wanted the background white. We decorated it with some of the white marble footstones that were discarded when the cemetery was repaired. I had thought when I saw all that fine material cast aside that something should be done so that it could be used by our community. When this project was proposed, I realized that these rocks would be contributing something to all the citizens of the community, and I think that is one of the fine things in this construction. Very good. One of the things they put in the monument was this headstone. It's got the initials HMC, and there was two of them that was right there. Okay. Oh, sorry. I'm getting told to get back over here. Anyway, this was two of them that was placed in there, and you can see the grout. They placed it in this way so you couldn't see the names. And when they tore down the old monument, that monument there, these were saved. Two of them were saved. I'm going to tell Councilman Oilert he needs to get these taken up to the Pioneer Cemetery and placed where they need to be placed. But then again, the cemetery after that was sort of lost again. But really it wasn't lost again. I mean, the Daughters of Pioneer would go up there all the time and clean it all the time. And plant flowers. They planted irises. I always call them flags, irises. But the bad thing about that is there was no water up there, so you would have to go take water up there in barrels or buckets to water those flowers to keep them alive. Now, this is what the cemetery looked like to me, or the monument looked, when I was first introduced to it by my mother. When I was about 10 years old, my mother took me up there for the very first time. We went up to the side. Go back to that again. We went up those steps, like we said before, went across those two fields, and she gave me a sickle and said, "Start cutting the weeds down." And we would take those sickles and cut it. We'd take the water and go up and water the plants, and we would do that at least 2 or 3 times a year. And I know I did that clear up to high school, and I'm sure my little brother did it up to about that time too. She really worked hard, and really worked us hard. Okay, next please. In 1980, they built this sign and put it in front of the gate. And then in 1992, next please, the sons and daughters of the Pioneer decided to redo the monument because it was in such terrible shape, and they needed to re-pour the steps in front. So this is a picture of the sons and daughters of Pioneer. The picture over to the right, let's see, would be to your right. The two women there, the one on the end is Christy Atwood, and the next to her is my mother, Fern Davis. Now, she looks pretty good with the shovel, don't you? You know, thank goodness she didn't have a fly swatter. That's what she used to punish us kids with. But isn't she beautiful? And next picture, please. They went up there and started pouring concrete. They redid a chain link fence around it. They re-graveled the path going down to 1400 East. They really worked hard. Next, please. In 1994, they repainted the sign and moved it and put new gravel on the path to keep it up. Christy Atwood, who I was showing you in that picture, seen Fred Vincent over there working in his field and walked over to him and says, "Fred, do you know who owns this property?" And Fred says, "I own it." And she says, "Would you do me a favor? Will you go down to the city and quit claim that property over to the city?" And Fred did. Fred went over and reclaimed it, so now the property was in the cities. In 1997, next please, we decided to put a flag up. I happened to be the scoutmaster of Troop 108, and I had a wonderful scout by the name of Spencer Peterson that wanted to do a flag. And so we went up and got permission from the city. We witched a place so we knew that we wasn't digging into any graves, and started this Eagle project. This is a picture of Scoutmaster Richard Davis looking over our work before we poured the concrete. Look how deep that is. We wanted to make sure it would hold decent. Next, please. This is a picture of me, and Spencer is the one on my right side with all of the merit badges. Look at all that. They were all hard-working scouts. And the other one on the other side is Doug Carlson. Next, please. And this is a picture of all my scouts saying the Pledge of Allegiance. My mother dedicated that flag. That was probably her last act as going up there and doing work. Next, please. A couple of years later, 1999, a new sign was done by the Sons of the Pioneer with Roy Johns made the sign, and then the Sons of the Pioneer went up and set this new sign up. That's the sign that we have today. It was moved and put at the front of our new cemetery. Then in 2007, the Daughters of Utah Pioneer again was looking at the cemetery and decided it wasn't what they wanted. They got tired of pulling weeds. They got tired of doing all those ugly things that they were doing. So a committee was formed. And if you were on this committee, any of you, and I have missed your name, I am so sorry. I'm just trying to read what I know. Next, please. These wonderful ladies, committee of Beverly Thomas, Tella Montague, Susan Barber, Pat Mitchell, Janine Basgard, Cleo Cox, Darlene Hurst, Jarlene Bowen, met with the city and developers and came up with a plan. Next, please. A plan of what they wanted our new Pioneer Cemetery to look like, with sidewalks all the way around, grass on the sides, and in the middle they were going to try to find as many headstones as they possibly could, which we didn't have. They had been destroyed when they were taking down the monument. I was on the city council at the time, and my mother sort of sprang up in me, and I wanted to be involved. So I went up to Del Robinson, who's over our Parks and Recreation Department, and Dave Anderson, who's over development. And I wanted to make sure that I was truly involved, and I told them I would pour all the concrete for nothing if you just let me be part of that. And so they did, and we set the plans, we drew it up the way we were. On a whim, I decided I wanted to go up and try to find all of the graves. So I went down to the lumber store and bought a couple of packages of stakes, and I took one of my workers with me, Trebucio Lopez. And we walked up there, and I started to witch for the graves. Now, I don't want you to think I'm a witch. Many people can witch. I was introduced to dowsing many years when I built my first house in Spanish Fork, and my plumber went up and found a water line, and same way I thought, what are you doing? He took two wires and was walking along until they crossed, and he said, this is where it's at. And I go, yeah, right. And then he said, well, you can do it too. And so I did it, and it crossed. I couldn't believe it did. And many people can witch. Many people can witch. In fact, after this dedicatorial at the cemetery, I was talking to the Daughters of Pioneers up there at the cemetery, and I took some wire with me, and afterwards, all of them wanted to see if they could do it. And I'm telling you, 7 out of 10 could do it. Some couldn't. They go, I don't know why I can't do it, but a lot of them could honestly do it. And I've done many firesides up there where I've taken my young men and young women, and we've done it, and a lot of people can. So it's not like it's a magic thing. And if you want to know about witching, you'll have to have Angela set something up, have somebody else talk about that. Anyway, I went up there and I found 101 graves. And when I got done, I went down and told Dave Anderson what I'd done, and he went up and had it GPS'd and put new stakes in, so this would never be lost again. Never be lost again. Janine Basgard and Pat Sager and a few other wonderful women came up with 125 names that had been in that cemetery. 22 of them had been exhumed and moved into the Spanish Fork and Springville Cemetery. But that left 103, and I had 101. So on a whim, I went back up and looked around and found 2 more over in the northeast corner of the cemetery. That's a miracle. I mean, that's a miracle. All 103. That's pretty neat. I poured all the concrete and the base for the statue that was being built. Next, please. This wonderful man, Brooke Larson, did an Eagle project and built all of the headstones and placed all of them. Next, please. Citizens, volunteers, and city workers went up and planted bushes and flowers and trees all the way around the outside just to make it beautiful. And on July 22nd, 2009, the Pioneer Cemetery was rededicated. The statue, next please, the statue of the Pioneer family was done and built by, I hope I say this right, Erasmo and Alex Fuentes. And it was presented, again, next please. Isn't that beautiful? I mean, that is beautiful. That's what it looked like then. And look at the trees and the bushes behind it. They're not very tall. I mean, it's just brand spanking new. Anyway, the speakers at that program, next please, was Mayor Joe Thomas, Del Robinson, next please, Janine Basgard, and it was dedicated, next please, by President Ross Basgard. Janine, she gave a beautiful talk, and I want to just read a couple more things that she said in her talk. She stated, "Because I did the research to find the names and stories of those buried here, I now feel I should take off my shoes when I walk here, for this is sacred ground. This Pioneer Cemetery is the final resting place of those who lived and died and struggled to survive during the difficult early years of building a new settlement in Spanish Fork. Their lives deserve to be remembered and honored. So to the dead who laid to rest here, we say, we remember you." It was wonderful. Next, please. There was, I think, 400 people at this dedication. Next, please. This is a picture of some girls dressed up as pioneers, and they went around putting flowers on all the headstones. You can see the other side. This is a picture of the statue with these girls surrounding it. Next, please. And this is a picture of what it looked like. Beautiful headstones and the flowers around it. And the dedication was all over, but I wasn't happy. Not at all. I did not like the way that looked. So I went to Del Robinson. I says, I don't like this prairie grass that has been grown there. I don't want to pull weeds ever again. So I went to the city council and I said, we need more money to plant sod. And we got it. And we put water lines in, and volunteers and city workers, we all went up there and planted and put new sod. Next, please. And this is what it looks like today. Isn't that beautiful? I mean, that's wonderful. Next, please. This is the northeast corner of the cemetery. That's where I found the other two graves. It's just below there. But I didn't want to disturb them. But look how the bushes and the trees have grown up. It's just beautiful. Next, please. This is looking from the west over to the east, and that's beautiful. Next, please. The sidewalks that go around it, monuments all the way around it that talk about the pioneers and what they went through and describe some of the early things that they did. Next, please. This is the front where the flagpole is. I wish the wind would have been blowing so the flag would have been coming out. But that's where the flagpole is today. Next, please. And then, of course, this wonderful statue. And look how the trees have grown now and the bushes. It's just beautiful. It's one of the most wonderful places on this earth. Next, please. On Memorial Day, Jarlene Bowen goes there and puts flowers on the graves. Next, please. And on Christmas, me and Tamara and my daughter Carissa, we go up there and we like to put candles because it's a tradition in Spanish Fork now to go up and put candles in the cemetery on all of our loved ones. And I thought it would be nice to go up there and put them on these wonderful pioneers. A cemetery shouldn't be just a monument. You ought to be able to see where the graves are, to feel their spirits, to know that someone is truly buried here and knows their struggles and their sacrifices. A good friend of mine who is a church historian came to that dedication, and he was there. And afterwards, he told me, this is like a temple. It's like hallowed ground, just like Janine says in her talk. A place we can come to be closer to our Father in heaven. The young people should come here in firesides and have testimony meetings. And I want to tell you, when I was the bishop of my ward, I did many of those. To talk about their heritage, the pioneers and their struggles, to build a city like we have today. He said this will not be forgotten. These pioneers are watching us, and one day there'll be hugs and tears and thank yous from them. Next, please. I love it up there. I mean, I really love going up there. I like standing right there, and I like looking over the river bottoms. I like, in the springtime, listen to the rooster pheasants talking to each other. And in the fall, I love watching the farmers cut their grass and hay and cut their corn. The smell of the hay comes up, and you can smell it in the air. I remember one time standing right there and watching a farmer cutting his corn, and he had about 6 or 7 rows left, and there was a big old buck deer that would go from one side to the other as he cut down one side and up the other until finally the last row he cut it and the deer bounced off down to the west. Next, please. Isn't that beautiful? That was taken probably by Pete, I don't know, or Travis or somebody. Anyway, looking down just before they started building the homes. But isn't that beautiful? May I finish my talk by reading a few of my notes. These were truly wonderful and brave people who, let me quote from the plaque, faced life and death struggles while facing hunger, hostile natives, disease, grasshoppers, and crop failures, who built roads and canals and plowed fields by hands and horses, lived in wagons and tents and holes in the ground. They left wonderful homes and families and friends because their faith in God and in their cause was greater. Now we mark another generation of daughters of Utah pioneers. We need you and the city to keep alive our heritage, the Pioneer Cemetery and the museum, to keep the memories alive and never let this hallowed ground ever go unkept again. I'm so grateful for the daughters of Utah Pioneer, for who you are and what you represent and all the hard work that you do. I'm thankful for my pioneer heritage, for my heritage. I'm thankful that I'm the son of a true pioneer, my mother. For her love, for her ancestors, and for her family, and for her Heavenly Father. I hope I can carry on her spirit and her love for this great cause. I'm thankful I grew up in Spanish Fork, in this wonderful city, to have known and know the people that lived and live here. I love it with all of my heart. I have my grave lots here, and one day I will be buried here. When I was running for city council, I ran on this quote. We live in a clean and beautiful place, and we need to work together and keep it that way. We need to be mindful of each other and serve each other, just like the pioneers. We need to depend on each other. My friends, you are familiar with their stories. You are the fruits of all of their labor and their planning and all of their labors. Whether you have pioneer ancestors or you came into town yesterday, you are part of their whole grand picture of which those men and women dreamed. Theirs was a tremendous undertaking. Ours is a great continuing responsibility. They laid the foundation. Ours is the duty to build on it. They marked the path and led the way. Ours is the obligation to enlarge and broaden and strengthen that path until it encompasses the whole earth. We are pioneers. May God bless these wonderful people, and may we encompass their testimony. Thank you.